Ghani Khan, in his book, The Pathans, has probably best expressed what a Pashtun is like and what a Pashtun thinks about Pashtuns. He admits that the Pashtun is not easy to love because it takes a lot of knowing, and his is the most complicated simplicity. Amongst his traits is a love of fighting, but he hates being a soldier, a love of music, but contempt for the musician, a temperamental neighbor who could become a loving friend or a deadly enemy. He knows no happy medium. That is his greatest virtue and his greatest drawback. Though kind and gentle with a tender heart, he dislikes showing it and tries to hide it under a rough and gruff exterior. He is too good a fighter to leave his weakest part uncovered. So the Pashtuns, A Contested History is my fourth book, in which I write about the Pashtun ethnic identity that straddles Afghanistan and Pakistan. Though no discussion of the people can be divorced from the countries in which they reside. The book is neither in the main about Afghanistan nor is it about Pakistan, but it is about the Pashtuns. This is their story. In other words, instead of talking about nation states and their territoriality, what I have done is to put the people, that is the Pashtuns, at the center of my book. A question I'm frequently asked is, why did I write this book? While growing up, I knew three things about the Pashtuns. Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore's 1892 short story, Kabuliwala, India's first fairness cream, Afghan Snow, and the larger-than-life Abdul Ghaffar Khan, his deep links with Mahatma Gandhi, and the non-violent struggle for India's freedom. All these projected a benign image of the Pashtuns. Bollywood pitched in too with the depiction of the Pathan, as the Pashtuns are called in India, as a friend and someone who fought on the side of the oppressed, especially women, and a host of actors who traced their origins to Pashtun ancestry. However, as I got older, the violence in Afghanistan and the Pak-Afghan border stunned me and was in total contrast to the image that I had of the Pashtuns while growing up. This made me want to find out what went wrong with them and study them in some detail, and hence the book. Another question I'm asked is, why have I written about the people rather than the countries in which they reside? The reason is that Pashtunistan, the land of the Pashtuns, spanning an area of more than 100,000 square miles, historically stretches from the Indus to the Hindu Kush. Today, this land and its people stand divided by the British-era controversial Durand Line into Afghanistan and Pakistan. Consequently, the Pashtuns, despite being perhaps the largest Muslim tribal population in the world, are without a state of their own. Though divided between two countries, the Pashtuns share a common ideology of descent, a common religion, common ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and familial bonds, common historical memories, and a common code, Pashtunwali, the way of the Pashtuns. These unifying bonds makes it possible to see them as a single entity, inhabiting a single piece of real estate, distinct from their neighbors. Hence the focus on the people instead of the two countries in which they are divided. Moreover, the present division of the Pashtuns is just one of the several avatars that this land has been subject to over the centuries. Pashtuns on both sides of the Durand Line, being one nation, is best expressed by the Pashto phrase, Laro bar yo Afghan, that is the Afghans in the low, as in the lowlands of Pakistan, and the high, as in the highlands of Afghanistan, are one. The book seeks answers to questions like, who are the Pashtuns? Where did they come from? What are their social and religious beliefs? And what is Pashtunwali and its relationship to Islam? It discusses the British experience of a century of contact with the Pashtuns, the Durand Line, Ghaffar Khan and Pashtun politics in Pakistan, the developments in Afghanistan, including the Soviet intervention, the Mujahideen, the civil war, and the rise to power of the Taliban in the 1990s. It goes on to describe the US intervention, the Taliban resurgence and ultimate victory, the incubation of the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, Khorasan province, and the dubious role of Pakistan in these events. One point I would like to stress is that in the post-2001 era, there were several lost opportunities where the US and the Afghan government could have mainstreamed the Taliban and made them a part of Afghan society. But those opportunities were lost, and Afghanistan had to see 20 years of war. Finally, The book analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of the Pashtuns. If the Pashtuns are ever to find peace and tranquility that they long for, break away from the cycle of violence and war, they will themselves have to find answers for their predicament and not depend on others to do so. The geography of the area has been both a weakness and a strength for the Pashtuns. Weakness because of being located on the land route to the wealth of India, and strength due to its mountainous terrain. The former attracted all manner of invaders, while the latter developed the robust character of the people, giving them the power to challenge every aggressor. Almost all invaders were to learn the hard way how difficult it was to rule over the Pashtuns. About geography, there is a popular saying, and I quote, "When God created the world, there were a lot of stones and rocks and other lumber left over, which were all dumped on this frontier." There are about 31 million Pashtuns in Pakistan, making up about 16% of the population and the third largest ethnic group after the Punjabis and the Sindhis. There are another 15 million in Afghanistan, where they are 40% of the population and the largest ethnic group, but not a majority. The city of Karachi is home to the largest Pashtun population in the world, superseding Pashtun cities like Peshawar, Kabul, Jalalabad, and Kandahar. Through most of history, the Pashtun region, now included within the boundaries of Afghanistan and Pakistan, has been contested and has witnessed more invasions than any other in Asia, or perhaps even the world. From the Greeks, the Persians, the Sakas, the Kushans, the Arabs, the Mongols, the Turks, the Mughals, the British, the Soviets, to the United States, the region has perhaps seen it all. In medieval times, Pashtunistan was a borderland and contested between empires that ruled from India, Iran, and Central Asia. In the last 2 centuries, the Pashtuns have had the unfortunate distinction of being invaded by each of the great powers of the time. Britain in the 19th century, when they became pawns in the great game between Britain and Russia. The Soviet Union in the latter half of the 20th century, when they became victims of the Cold War and subjected to an invasion and destructive civil war. And the United States in the 21st century, when they became the central factor in the war on terror and its aftermath. Today, the Pashtuns again face an uncertain future with the Taliban back in the saddle. Battered by constant invasions and fighting, especially in the last 50 years, Pashtun society has been rent asunder and become radicalized, with devastating consequences for themselves, for the region, and for the world. Most invaders attempted to conquer and subdue the Pashtuns, but ultimately failed, giving the land the moniker of the graveyard of empires. The reason was that, as all invaders found out, the Pashtun tribesmen would not be defeated. As has been well put, you cannot defeat a people who have no concept of defeat in the classical sense. They only believe in survival. They know when to run, when to hide, when to talk, and when to fight, but as per Afghan time. Not surprisingly, these invasions have bred a tough and hardy people with a unique way of life and a unique way of looking at the world. But who are the Pashtuns? There has been a fair amount of confusion about the terms Pashtun, Pakhtun, Pathan, Afghan. The ambiguity stems from the fact that the Pashtuns have been commonly referred to interchangeably with Afghan due to the Persian usage of Abagan, Afghan, or Afghana for the Pashtuns. During the British rule, a distinction was made between Afghan and Pathan. The Afghans were considered under Persian influence and spoke Dari, while the Pathans had greater interaction with India and spoke Pashto. A word about Pakhtun and Pashtun. Tribes in the north of the region use the term Pakhtun, while the southern tribes use the term Pashtun. Similarly, Pakhto is used to describe the language in the north and Pashto in the south. I have used Pashtun and Pashto throughout the book. There is no unanimity among scholars about the origin of the Pashtuns or when they came to settle in Pashtunistan. The various hypotheses about the origins vary from Semitic beginnings to an Indo-Aryan inception. Additionally, the region experienced substantial historical in-layers of migration over approximately 2,000 years from the north, the west, and the east-southeast. Each horde as it passed would have left its mark on the inhabitants of the country, one way of life constantly overlaying another. As a result, the region became a melting pot of migrations, creating ethnic complexity. While scholars continue to debate the issue of Pashtun origins, There have been many attempts to codify Pashtun genealogies, the most famous being the Makhzan-e-Afghani, History of the Afghans, compiled in India by Ni'matullah al-Harawi after being commissioned by Jahangir in 1613. According to these chronicles, the Pashtuns themselves claim descent from a common ancestor, Qais bin Rashid or Qais Abdul Rashid, who met the Prophet at Medina around 622 and was converted to Islam. On his return to Gaur, Qais is supposed to have successfully propagated the new faith. Qais had 4 sons, 3 biological and 1 adopted, who are today accepted as the founders of the major tribes under the Pashtun lineage. From all their sons and grandsons of Qais Abdul Rashid sprang the hundreds of tribes, sub-tribes, and local lineages of the Pashtuns. Interestingly, this narrative is an article of faith among the Pashtuns, who determined the start of their lineage with conversion to Islam, ignoring their whole history before Qais. They believe in the purity of descent of their religion, believing that they have no infidel past, nor do they carry in their history the blemish of defeat and forcible conversion, almost like a chosen people. But despite the Pashtun belief of descent from a common ancestor who was converted by the Prophet, the reality is different. Historically, scholars agree that Islam initially came to Afghanistan through the conquest of Arab generals in the service of the Rashidun caliphs and the Umayyad dynasty. Initially, it was Balkh that became an important Islamic center. However, given the nature of Afghanistan's mountainous terrain, it took another 2 to 3 centuries for Islam to spread to other regions. The mountainous areas of the Hindu Kush, eastwards to Kabul and Peshawar, remained holdouts against Islam for many centuries. These areas included Buddhist rulers in Bamiyan and Hindu Shahi rulers in Kabul. Kabul in particular was a Hindu kingdom at war with the Ghaznavids. Ghaznavid sources have undifferentiated Afghans listed both as Ghazis and as enemies fighting against them. The Hindu rulers of Kabul continued till at least the 10th century, and Buddhism survived until the late 10th century. Quite likely, Hindu and Buddhist practices would have survived till much later. In remote areas, it probably took 4 to 5 centuries for the conversion of Islam to be complete. The perceived direct link to the Prophet notwithstanding, Afghanistan followed tribal Islam, where Sharia was interspersed with Afghan tribal customs and a strong Sufi presence, a kind of folksy Islam that blended pre-Islamic rituals and a reverence for saints and shrines not explicitly identified with the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet. Many religious leaders would view some of the Islamic practices followed by the Pashtun tribesmen as only borderline Islamic. Despite this, the Pashtuns continue to practice those rituals. As a Pashtun saying goes, the Pashtuns accept half of the Quran. To most Pashtuns, the Deobandis, they have been influenced by Sufism and Barelvi practices that supplement Pashtun culture and involve participation in urs, wearing taweez, and belief in the healing powers of holy men. According to former Afghan ambassador to Islamabad, Abdul Salam Zaif, his father, a village mullah, wrote taweez for the ill. He held that there were times when faith worked where medicines did not. The tribesmen have faith that their saint, often a Sufi, will intercede with God on their behalf. Generally, Afghans consider Sufism an integral part of Islam and do not view it as an innovation or a deviation from Islam. Despite this, the legacy of Afghan Sufis is not widely known, and very few are aware of the fact that Afghanistan was a major center of a moderate and tolerant Islamic culture. Major cities such as Balkh, Ghazni, Herat, Kabul, Kandahar, Peshawar had been among the most important centers of Sufism. That is why Herat is popularly called Khak-e-Auliya, the soil of Sufi saints, while Ghazni is known as the abode of Sufi saints. For example, Ali bin Utham al-Hajwari, moved from Ghazni to Lahore, is one of the most renowned Sufis. In Lahore, he was known by the name of Data Sahib or Data Ganj Bakhsh. His shrine today in Lahore is known as Data Darbar and is one of the most popular and famous Sufi shrines in Pakistan. You may be surprised to know that Mullah Omar, the Taliban Amir till his death, was deeply influenced by Sufism. As a child, Sufi teachers like Haji Baba educated him, and as Taliban's supreme leader, he would visit his old teacher's grave almost weekly. A major point of difference between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda was the issue of Sufi shrines. Al-Qaeda held shrine worship to be un-Islamic innovation and an insult to their Wahhabi sensibilities. Over 2 decades of waging an insurgency, the Taliban's ideology transformed from being traditionalist Islam to being a form of political Islam espoused in the Arab world. Hence, the ideology of the core leadership became a blend of Deobandi and Wahhabi Islam, with the beliefs of the Deobandis getting exaggerated in the Afghan Taliban. A significant development in the past few decades is that the Pashtuns along the border separating Pakistan and Afghanistan, especially in former Fatah, have begun to shift their religious orientation from Deobandi Sufi beliefs to the more restrictive and militant Salafism as a result of the arrival of thousands of Middle East fighters during the Soviet Jihad and the introduction of Salafi ideologies that discouraged Sufism. The Pashtuns have a unique and defining tribal code called Pashtunwali, or the way of the Pashtun, that distinguishes them from other ethnic groups. It is an unwritten set of values, customs, and cultural codes that governs routine life. The various elements of Pashtunwali taken together represent the Pashtun's notion of a Gairatmand Pashtun, that is an ideal Pashtun who leads an honorable life. At its core, Pashtunwali is about Nang, or honor, rooted in the triangle of Zan, Zar, Zameen, that is women, wealth, and land. As Kushal Khan Khattak, the warrior Pashto poet, wrote, "I despise the man who does not guide his life by honor. The very word honor drives me mad." He further wrote, "The very name Pashtun spells honor and glory. Lacking that honor, what is the Afghan story?" Since the responsibility of upholding individual and tribal honor rests with the males, most carry weapons, which have become a tangible expression of the code of honor. The obligatory weapon symbolizes a man's status in society, signaling his role as protector of his community. "A man's gun is a jewelry" is a popular proverb amongst the Pashtuns. The fate of an individual who is not able to uphold honor is possibly worse than death. He would be called daus, or a person with no honor, quite possibly the worst slur or insult one Pashtun can bestow on another. Interestingly, for the Pashtun, the very concept of justice is wrapped up in the maintenance of his honor and independence from external authority. Breaking the laws of the state to take action to preserve honor would seem perfectly acceptable to a Pashtun. In fact, his honor would demand it. The obligation to take revenge or badal is another critical part of Pashtunwali, which, according to some, helps regulate behavior in the absence of a legal system. As young Winston Churchill put it, and I quote, "No injury was to be forgotten and no debt left unpaid. Every Pashtun knows that transgressions against another's honor will lead to revenge against the transgressor, and it is in his interest not to provoke badal." As a Pashtun proverb states, "He is not a Pashtun who does not give a blow in return for a pinch." There is no time limit for revenge. Again, a Pashtun saying is that the Pashtun who took revenge after 100 years said, "I took it too quickly." Ghaffar Khan's eldest son, the poet and artist Ghani Khan, described the working of the badal, and I quote, "If dishonored, the Pathan must shoot. There is no alternative. If he does not, his brothers will look down upon him, his father will sneer at him, his sister will avoid his eyes, his wife will be insolent, and his friends will cut him off. One day he goes out and never comes back. He has laughed his way into a bullet that was fired by another of his own blood and race." Other elements of Pashtunwali include Milmastia, which is hospitality, and Nanavati, offering shelter and protection. The concept of hospitality is held in such high esteem that it even trumps revenge, as seen in the chivalrous offering of food and provisions, even to enemies who seek refuge. The problem with Pashtunwali for the West is, as Charles Allen writes, an uncompromising social code so profoundly at odds with Western mores that its application constantly brings up with a jolt. Talking about Pashtun honor, Churchill noted that it was so strange and inconsistent as to be incomprehensible to a logical mind. And he says, "I have been told that if a white man could grasp it fully and were able to understand their mental impulses, if he knew when it was their honor to stand by him and when it was their honor to betray him, when they were bound to protect and when they were bound to kill him, he might, by judging his times and opportunities, pass safely from one end of the mountains to the other." Another characteristic of the Pashtun is that they are regarded as perhaps the most highly segmentary ethnic group in the world. The Afghan individual is surrounded by concentric rings consisting of family, extended family, clan, tribe, confederacy, and major cultural linguistic group. The hierarchy of loyalties corresponds to these circles and becomes more intense as the circle gets smaller. Seldom does an Afghan, regardless of cultural background, need the services and/or facilities of the national government. Thus, in case of crisis, his recourse is to the kinship and, if necessary, the larger cultural group. National feelings or loyalties are altered through the successive layers. Such segmentation also explains why, historically, no foreign entity, whether Alexander, the British, the Soviets, the Afghans, or the Pakistani, have been able to reconcile the Pashtuns to external rule, let alone subjugate them. Another unique feature of the Pashtun tribes is their acephalous, that is, without leaders, where each man guards his status and independence jealously. Every household head is thus a petty chief, and no collective tribal action is possible without his consent. This is best represented by the common saying, every man is a Malik, the elder. The same sentiment was reflected when a Masood elder told the British in the early 20th century, either blow us up all with cannon or make all 18,000 of us Nawabs. According to Ghani Khan, the Pashtun is a great democrat. The Pathans are rain-sown wheat. They all came up on the same day. They are all the same. However dirty and coarse his hand, he will stretch it to a king for a handshake. However meager his meal, he will invite an emperor to share it. Look at the warmth in my eyes, he tells his guest, not the hardness of the cornbread before you. Taking an overview, several strands about the Pashtuns will be visible in the book. First, the tragedy of the Pashtuns is that since December 1979, they have been subjected to constant warfare. This prolonged war has caused one of the largest displacements of people in recent times, with the main victims being Pashtuns, whether they were refugees who sought shelter in Pakistan and Iran, or the internally displaced persons in Pakistan as a result of various army operations. The Pashtuns have also suffered the most in the globalization of jihad because of the structural changes that Pashtun society underwent on both sides of the Durand Line. Traditional Pashtun leadership was brushed aside, at times violently, and replaced with Afghan and Pakistani radical Islamists. Worse, those being killed were Pashtuns, and those who were killing were also Pashtuns. Most of the Afghan Mujahideen were Pashtun, the Taliban are Pashtun, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is Pashtun. Those whom they have killed in Afghanistan and in the erstwhile Fatah are Pashtuns. Even Pashtun children have not been spared, and the story is not yet over. The killing, the wars go on. Second, a major feeling of the Pashtun as a collective is that they have shown unity and national solidarity only when seriously threatened by foreigners. To a lesser extent, they, or a section of them, have also united when engaged in successful military offensives, territorial conquests, and plundering raids. Other than that, the long history of the Pashtuns show fragmentation and feuds and conflicts with one another. Attempts at unity by some leaders have either been futile or have not lasted beyond the lifetime of the leader. As a result, outsiders have subjected them to intermittent invasion and even occupation, however limited in time and space it may have been. In fact, one of the greatest laments of Kushal Khan Khattak was the disunity among the Pashtuns, whom he had vainly tried to bring together. And he wrote, more skilled in the swords are the Pashtuns and the Mughals, but only more intelligence was theirs. Were the tribes but of agreement amongst themselves, emperors would prefer to bow before them. In another poem, he appeals to God and prays, O God, grant them but concord, sweet refrain, and old Kushal will rise a youth again.
So could you just repeat the name of this poet?
Kushal Khan Khattak. He was head of the Khattak tribe who fought against the Mughals. The third strand is the representation of their proclivity for conflict and warfare, largely due to excessive reliance on colonial literature. For example, as Churchill, again to quote him, wrote, except at the time of sowing and harvesting, a continual state of feud and strife prevails throughout the land. Tribe wars with tribe. Every tribesman has a blood feud with his neighbor. Every man's hand is against the other, and all against a stranger. Unfortunately, there has been a lack of counter-narratives about the Pashtuns that could challenge the colonial stereotypes. The non-violence of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the activities of Pashtun tribal elders who have stood against the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda and paid a huge price for such resistance, and the evolution of the non-violent Pashtun Tahaffuz movement have not received the kind of attention they should have. Apart from the lack of counter-narratives, while there is an abundance of British literature on the Pashtun, there are not many Pashtun versions of how they saw themselves or saw the British. Ghani Khan, in his book, The Pathans, has probably best expressed what a Pashtun is like and what a Pashtun thinks about Pashtuns. He admits that the Pashtun is not easy to love because it takes a lot of knowing, and his is the most complicated simplicity. Amongst his traits is a love of fighting, but he hates being a soldier, a love of music, but contempt for the musician, a temperamental neighbor who could become a loving friend or a deadly enemy. He knows no happy medium. That is his greatest virtue and his greatest drawback. Though kind and gentle with a tender heart, he dislikes showing it and tries to hide it under a rough and gruff exterior. He's too good a fighter to leave his weakest part uncovered. Fourth, a critical thread after the creation of Pakistan has been the Pashtunistan issue. The newly created state of Pakistan inherited the British territories and with it the issue of Afghan irredentism. The efforts of Ghaffar Khan to unite the Pashtuns into Pashtunistan at the time of partition of the subcontinent came to naught, but it sowed the seeds of doubt amongst the Pakistani leadership about the loyalty of his followers. Post-partition, several Pashtun-led governments have intermittently raised the issue of Pashtunistan about the validity of the Durand Line and challenged Pakistan's right to rule over its Pashtun areas. For its part, Punjabi-dominated Pakistan has worked systematically to overwhelm Pashtun impulses for Pashtunistan. This central thread has been one of the key drivers of Pakistan's policy towards the Pashtuns. Its efforts have been to snuff out Pashtun nationalism and install a friendly and dependent government in Kabul that has been mainly responsible for the current turmoil in Pashtunistan. To do so, Pakistan has manipulated the deeply held religious beliefs of the Pashtuns to encourage the growth of radicalism, terrorism, and violence. An interesting dynamic at play currently is how would a resurgent Taliban deal with the issue of the Durand Line. In their early avatar in the 1990s, they refused to accept it despite Pakistan pressure. Current indicators are that not only have they continued to resist such pressure, but elements of them have actually torn down the fence in certain areas. The leadership has called the issue unresolved and termed it as dividing a nation. The moot question is if the Taliban will be able to further the issue of Pashtunistan and the aspirations and interests of the Pashtuns. Finally, the key to peace in Afghanistan and to peaceful Pashtun politics would lie in a democratic and pluralistic Pakistan that can gradually change the prevalent security mindset of the Punjabi-dominated Pakistani establishment. This mindset will have to evolve beyond seeing Pakistan's security primarily in military terms, and that to focus on India. By continuing to see the Pashtuns and Afghanistan through the Indian prism, Pakistan has adopted the wrong tools of policy for its security. Only a vibrant civilian democracy will take care of these issues. The world community, and especially the United States, must recognize that in a fundamental sense, security in Afghanistan hinges on democratizing Pakistan. So long as the military dominates Pakistan and controls state institutions, there will be no democracy in Pakistan. And on its own, the Pakistan state is unlikely to give up the jihadis as instruments of state policy for achieving their foreign policy goals.
Sir, I'll start with my own question. We've had a talk on Pakistan, especially on the Balochistan question. Now you're speaking about the Pashtuns. We already know that there are these tribes which want, and there is Azad Kashmir, POK, which kind of backfired on Pakistan. With so many problems going on so many fronts, it does not look that the Pakistan's policy is to address these. Rather, it is like Kashmir leke rahenge or, cricket matches kind of.
Yeah. But you're talking like a rational person. Unfortunately, in the case of Pakistan, when it comes to India, they are completely irrational. It is the, as I mentioned in my first book, the very creation of Pakistan. They don't have an identity of their own. The only identity is to be anti-India. So anything they feel will promote anti-Indianness, whether it is in Afghanistan or directly in India, they will pursue that irrespective of the cost to themselves. So rationally, they should have good relations both with India and Afghanistan, become a center of trade, follow geoeconomics, and they can leverage their geographical position and make a lot of money through trade, through being a transit country. But because of this military mindset and seeing security purely in military terms, they will not do it. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer to have good relations with both your neighbors, because neither of them are a threat to you. In fact, you're a threat to both of them. But wo karenge nahi because of the hatred for India.
So that being the larger political ideology, what explains that on the World Happiness Index, Pakistan is much, much, much higher than India?
Let me ask you, these indexes, and what rationality or what reality do they have? Koi kuch bhi karke likh de. Look at the World Hunger Index report, which came out recently. How do you believe that? How do you believe, what is happiness? How do people, Indians, we always cribbing. Khush hai, sab kuch hai, fir bhi bar nahi. So I will not go by that at all. You look at the actual ground conditions in Pakistan today. They are in a big mess, whether it is politically, whether it is economically, whether it is socially. It's polarization. Look at the social polarization in the country. I'll give you an example. The newspaper Dawn had recently published an article where they quoted a 7-year-old girl telling her father that now in class, the children of parents who are PTI supporters, that is Imran Khan's party, and children who are supporters of Nawaz Sharif sit separately and don't talk to each other. This is a 7-year-old girl. That is the kind of social polarization which is there in Pakistan today. So they have huge problems, So this happiness index, I'm very skeptical, I'm sorry.
Not a nice thing to say, but it's a kind of relief, because since last year, I have been very intrigued that how come they are like somewhere in the top hundreds and we are close to 200.
So I've heard that at the time of partition, Frontier Gandhi told Nehru and Mohandas, MKG basically that, he wants to, be with India, and he was snubbed. And then these set of people basically descended down in October and created chaos in our northwest corner, which is Kashmir. Now, are these two things related? And if yes, how? And then really what happened? Was there a sudden change of heart, or if you can throw some light on that?
Yeah. So, what you say is right. I've explained this in detail what happened at the time of partition. You see, the Congress Khudai Khidmatgar government had been re-elected in the 1946 elections. This was a problem for the British, because if the decision was left to the NWFP assembly to vote for accession to either India or to Pakistan, they would have voted for accession to India, because it was a Congress government. The British did not want that. They had a complete mindset that you have Muslim Pakistan, you have a Hindu India. They were very clear on this binary. So in fact, Lord Ismay, who was Mountbatten's chief of staff, called the situation in NWFP as a bastard situation where a Muslim majority province had voted the Congress into power. So they said this cannot be. So they maneuvered to hold a referendum and not allow this decision to the assembly, but that we will hold a referendum. And the choice will be India versus Pakistan. Ghaffar Khan said, first of all, Ghaffar Khan was very upset that how could the Congress accept this formulation? He was upset that Congress accepted the principle of partition. Then the Congress went ahead and accepted referendum. That is when he told Gandhiji, you have thrown us to the wolves. And this was done even without consulting them. They were in Delhi when the Congress Working Committee was meeting. But for whatever reasons, the Congress leadership at that time, except for Gandhiji tried very hard to save the situation for the Pashtuns. But the Congress leadership just accepted Mountbatten's plan. I don't know, for whatever reason, I can't speculate. And Ghaffar Khan was shattered and was totally demoralized. So he went back and he said, if there is a referendum, then it has to be on the basis of Pakistan and Pashtunistan. It cannot be on the basis of India and Pakistan. The British rejected that, and so he boycotted the referendum. So that much historical evidence is there that India did let him down. In fact, later on when Ghani Khan asked Gandhiji that what happens when we are not looked after, if you have a problem. And so then Gandhiji said, India will come to your rescue. He said, what happens to your non-violence? And Gandhiji said, I am non-violent, the state is not non-violent. You know, some sort of an assurance was held out. Now, where the tribesmen are, because you have to make a distinction between the settled areas of NWFP, where Ghaffar Khan was a dominating personality, and the tribal areas, which is called the federally administered tribal areas. The people who came to attack Kashmir were the tribesmen who had been motivated by lure of riches, by plunder and all that. And they are the ones who came and attacked in Kashmir, pushed into by Pakistani trucks and motivated to come. So that was the reason why it happened.
Regarding your answer here, you were talking about Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. His son is supposed to have said, and you quoted it in your book, that I am a 6,000-year-old Pashtun and a 1,000-year-old Muslim and a 27-year-old Pakistani. Where does the Pashtun identity lie today in view of so much of antagonism against Pakistan itself?
So, you know, this shows the identity crisis in Pakistan. The Pashtun ethnic identity is very strong, whether it is in today's Afghanistan or whether it is in Pakistan. They are Pashtuns, you know, they're very strong. Then they're very staunch Muslims. You know, Deobandi, Sufi influences there. And they've been Pakistanis now for 75 years. When Wali Khan said it, he had been there for 27 years. So this Pashtun ethnic identity is very strong. That is what Pakistan is so worried about. That is why the Punjabi-dominated Pakistan is concerned that if the desire for Pashtunistan in Pakistan and the desire for irredentism in Afghanistan, the two of them were to meet, then Pakistan stands to lose about 1/4 of its country. So therefore, their effort always has been to keep Kabul, Afghanistan weak and dependent on it, so that they can never raise the issue of the Durand Line and can never create trouble for Pakistan with its own Pashtun population. So Wali Khan's statement is very, very, meaningful statement. And Pakistan has failed for the last 70 years to create a Pakistani identity, which will override the Pashtun identity, which will override the Baloch, which will override the Sindhi. It is only the Punjabi who has lost his, or let's say merged his identity in a Pakistani identity. But the Pashtun, the Baloch, and the Sindhis and the Saraikis also, you know, they continue to maintain the strong Pashtun, their strong ethnic identity.
I am an old guy. I was born in 1939. I'm watching events since 1947 because I was a refugee myself. Okay. And I saw the violence and so on. And since then, I've been wondering why all these fights. Okay, I'll come to my questions now. Are the Afghans settled in India? You will call them also Pashtuns?
Pathan.
Pathans. Okay, so Pathan and Pashtun, is there a difference between them?
No. You see, the British, instead of actually Pashtuns, the Persians, as I mentioned in my talk, the Persians, because they had controlled what is now South Afghanistan, they called the Pashtuns Afghan. The British used Afghan for those who spoke Dari and were associated with Persia, and called Pathans or Pashtuns those who were associated with India. So they tried to make the distinction. So in India and the subcontinent, we all call them Pathans. The Pashtuns and Pathans are the same.
Okay. Now my question is that, can you tell me something about why such a dichotomy? When you come across and what you read in media about their cultures, their hardcore Muslims and this and that, and the respect for Indians?
Okay, so let me answer this in two parts. India has had very old civilizational links with the Pashtuns, go back to the Mahabharata. After all, Gandhari came from Peshawar, right? Then you had Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka. These areas were part of their empire, the Mauryan Empire. And even today you will find Ashoka's pillars, Buddhist pillars, inscriptions, you will find them all over Afghanistan and in the Pashtun lands. Then you had the three dynasties of Pashtuns. They were the Khiljis, they were the Lodhis, and they were the Suris who ruled in the Delhi Sultanate. Thereafter, when the British came, they broke up, and then you must have heard of Rohilas around Delhi. Then the Principality of Bhopal, of Tonk, of Farrukhabad. So the Pashtuns have dispersed in many parts of India, and they have for centuries. So, this relationship with India is very old, and they respect it. And second part of the answer is that the Pashtuns are conservative people, but they have never been fanatics. Therefore, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was so closely associated with Mahatma Gandhi and believed in non-violence. Till 1947, a large number of Sikhs and Hindus continued to stay in NWFP. Even till very recently, they were in Kabul. And, the Afghan Sikhs who came recently because of the persecution and the Taliban and the bomb blast. So there have been toing and froing between between Hindus and Afghans for centuries. So they have a great regard, respect, because they were not fanatics. It is the recent last 40 years when the influx of ideologies, foreign ideologies have penetrated and have come. This Wahhabi Salafi influence has come that has made them more restrictive than what they used to be earlier. So an Afghan will make a fantastic friend. Pashtun will make a great friend, and he has great regard for India.
Yeah, at one point you said that they say they have been Afghans for 6,000 years and Muslims for 1,000 years, Pakistanis for 75. That is beautiful way to explain that what you just said. Okay, very good. Now, another question is about their educational levels. Can you give me a sense of, as a total society, in terms of their, how many they have advanced in letters and sciences or degrees and so on? Because most of the people, what I came across, I was in Saudi Arabia also for about 4 years, and I saw that there were most of the drivers there. Okay, they were mostly Afghanis. I mean, that was very interesting. And all the Afghanis I have come across, most of them are workers. You see, I've not come across any really in professional circles. So can you give me some sense of their development in that?
The last 50 years of warfare, the education system has suffered a lot. And in terms of the arts, they are very good and strong in poetry, not so much in literature, not so much in engineering, not so much in other things. There are people, but the education system has been pretty badly affected during the last 50 years of war. So that is one reason you will find that in the case of Pashtun intellectuals are few. I wouldn't say they are not there. They are very much there. You take, President Karzai or Ghani, who is a World Bank economist. They have people. It's not that they have, but across the board, if you take, there will probably be more, as you mentioned, blue-collar workers than in terms of intellectuals because of the impact, devastation of the education system during the 50 years of war.
Yeah, because in Pakistan Army, for example, there are a lot of Afghans,
In Balochistan, in case of Balochistan, we hear of the forced disappearances and the atrocities that are happening over there. I believe there is antagonism between Pakistan and the Pashtuns also, but we haven't heard much about what is going on over there.
Yes, you have this rights movement, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement. So that in the total mainstream media blackout, the army the army does not know how to react to a purely human rights movement, which is talking about rights that the Constitution of Pakistan provides to them. You have people going missing even among the Pashtuns. You have a famous case of Ali Wazir, who is a member of the National Assembly. And the last 2.5 years, he's been behind bars. Even though courts have released him, granted him bail, yet he's not released from prison. There are a lot of other people who have gone missing, like not so much as in Balochistan, but they have gone missing even in, even among the Pashtuns. So their alienation is growing. And then you have the violent Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which wanted initially to set up after Musharraf's attack on the Lal Masjid. Now they wanted Sharia to be imposed in federally administered tribal areas, the erstwhile. And now they're even talking about an independent FATA, which they want to control. So there are a lot of things happening which don't get reported in the mainstream media, but it is very active on social media. So if you follow social media and you follow some of the Pashtuns, the Pashtun Tahafuz movement, you'll get a lot of more information of how they are also being alienated by these strong arm tactics of basically it's a Punjabi army. They have some Pashtuns also, Pashtun officers at higher levels, and also among the rank and file, but it is still 60 to 70% is Punjabi.
Actually, Balochistan was mentioned. That is a very, okay. How much similar or dissimilar are Baluchis from Afghanis?
Among the Pashtuns, yes, they are very different. You see, among the Baloch, they have called a Sardari Nizam. Each tribe is headed by the Sardar, who is highly respected and who leads the tribe. In the case of the Pashtuns, they don't consider anybody to be superior to them because they have a common ancestor and they believe they all came up on the same day. So achievement or status is achieved in the case of the Pashtuns. In the case of the Baloch, it is heredity.
See, to me, it sounds like the cultures develop more in terms of basic value system, who they are in relation to others. These are finer points. You see, so what I mean is that if the neighboring country, will there be conflict between them, Balochis and Afghanis?
No, because both of them in a tribal system, as they say, हम अपने वतन में बैठे हैं, हम अपनी जमीनों पे बैठे हुए हैं. The Pashtuns are not going to try and go into Baloch areas. The Baloch will not go into Pashtun areas. So there is
perfect.
So there is not going to be no conflict between them per se. They don't have ambitions over each other's territory. They're happy with what they have, but they want to administer it themselves.
So I had like two quick questions. The first one was about what has happened is that a lot of what is happening in Afghanistan, they don't blame it on the influx of Wahhabism, as you had pointed out 30, 40 years back, in part due to the Russian occupation, but they blame it on Pashtunwali, which is, a code of honor that dates back to pre-Islamic times, but conflating that with Islamist extremism, right? Because Pashtunwali talks about honor, revenge, and a couple of other things that are very tribal in nature, but they conflate that in the way women are treated and the education system and intellectual are looked upon in that country. So I just wanted to know, sir, that do you think that the concept of Pashtunwali has been abused, for the benefit of the Pakistani state? Is there any truth to that, or has that just evolved in the last 50 years as a result of Wahhabism and other Salafist ideologies? That was the first question, sir.
So let me answer this first. Pashtunwali existed for thousands of years before Pakistan was created. Pashtunwali has been responsible for the survival of the Pashtuns as a tribal group through the centuries, despite maximum number of invasions in the world. So there's nothing wrong with Pashtunwali. It is a code of way of conduct where a tribe or a group holds dear to itself. Those are their core values. Just say hamari core values, those are the core values of the Pashtuns. Now, who says that the problem is not Wahhabi, but it's Pashtunwali? I didn't get that. Who did you say that? Pakistanis, Pashtuns themselves, who says it?
So, sir, this is like I live in the US. So this is a lot of the, I would say, things that are propagated in the intellectual circles here, which when I'm connected.
No, by whom? By whom?
There's nothing in particular. It's mainly by a lot. So like I've attended some talks in Princeton in Columbia where they've spoken about Pashtunwali, right? When
you see, the basic problem in the West, as I quoted Charles Allen, the West does not understand Pashtunwali because it is so far divorced from their thinking. They don't. And in fact, the problem in a lot of scholars, famous Johnson and Mason, one of the papers they wrote, is the basic problem with the US in intervention in Afghanistan was they didn't understand this lineage system. They did not understand Pashtunwali. They did not understand what the Pashtuns were all about. That is what the problem was. It is not Pashtunwali that is the problem. It's the fact that Pakistan has exploited and manipulated the deeply held conservative religious beliefs of the Pashtuns and pointed them in a direction which is totally divorced from their Deobandi Sufi culture. By mixing in what was essentially a Middle Eastern concept of Wahhabism and this Salafism, that is how they have turned the conservative Pashtuns into something they weren't. There are a lot of Pashtuns who are opposed to the Taliban because of this Wahhabi influence. It will take a long time to purge it of this. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. If Pakistan keeps on manipulating them and exploiting them, it probably won't happen at all. But certainly Pashtunwali is not the problem of the Pashtuns. The problem with the Pashtuns is why Pakistan has exploited religious beliefs. See, people talk about revenge. At a time when there was no legal system, there is no courts, Pashtunwali made sure that before you committed a wrong, you would think 10 times because you knew that the Pashtun is going to give you a blow for a pinch. It regulated social behavior. That is what Pashtunwali did. And yet, even if somebody was wronged, if he came to your enemy's door, then as per the norms of Melmastia or hospitality, he would be fed. And that enmity would be forgotten for the time so long as he was the guest. This is a pretty advanced kind of a system which we tend to sneer at because we think they're violent, they're uneducated, they're things. It's a pretty advanced system.
One quick clarification before I get to my second question. So the source which I was mentioning is multiple. One of them was even a Hollywood movie. I don't recollect the name, but it was about an American chopper that was, or a rescue team that went in and they were protected by the local Afghans. And I think a lot of what you had explained and what I've read about Pashtunwali was twisted, in a very perverse sense. And also in some of the talks that I've attended here, by mainly left-leaning West liberal scholars, regardless of political affiliation, they state that, well, women were always treated the same way because that's how Pashtunwali treated the women, but Pashtunwali was never about that. So they have sort of, as you had rightly mentioned, twisted it to suit their own narrative. So I just wanted to give some clarification about the references. So the second question was about, what has happened is that a lot of the Afghans that you would meet overseas, the overseas diaspora, they hearken to the days of Emperor Zahir Shah, right? And his overthrow having to do with the state of Afghanistan today and basically co-opting the state with more Pakistani influence than it existed prior. So is there any truth to that? And did you see a descent of Afghanistan in terms of its social structure after the emperor was overthrown?
During the Zahir Shah's long rule was the longest period of peace that Afghanistan has ever had. It was unfortunate that his own cousin Daud, Muhammad Daud Khan, overthrew him in a peaceful coup and abolished the monarchy and established a presidency in 1973. And then in turn was overthrown by the communist PDPA. And then, of course, the Soviet intervention and then, just spiral of violence spiraled out. So yes, Zahir Shah's period is considered one of the golden periods in Afghan history. And, he was a Durrani. So when the Taliban came onto power, one of the options was, or even, to bring Zahir Shah back. But because the Taliban are mostly from the Gilzai Confederacy, they didn't want a Durrani. So Zahir Shah was kept out of the picture.
Sir, Imran Khan also quotes a bit of his Pashtun lineage from somewhere, which is like slightly more than what Rahul Gandhi calls himself a Shiv Bhakt, but because that Imran Khan still has some authenticity to it. I feel that the current situation, as you were discussing yesterday with the Major Gaurav, in the current situation in Pakistan with Imran Khan, with the TTP and the dissension, the dissent happening, and the rage against the army, which is happening for the first time, it seems like छोटे बच्चे बोलते हैं ना, हमको नहीं खिलाओगे तो हम गेम मचाएंगे. So where in that lies the Pashtun self-respect? In fact, what if Pakistan is blacking out all the media? This is my second question. And the atrocities and the disappearances which are happening with the Pashtuns also. What happens to the sense of badal, which kind of goes on generations?
So that's the thing which Pakistani should be very worried about. There is no time limit to revenge. As I said, Pashtun who took revenge after 100 years said I took it too quickly. So today the Pashtuns are not in a strong position vis-a-vis Pakistan. But time will come and things will change. That is the time when the Pakistan, and the Punjabi elite will have to be worried for. In the case of Imran Khan, you see, there would have been Pashtuns at one time settled in Miawali, and family originally was also in time of 47 came from Jalandhar. So a lot of Punjabi influx is there. He doesn't know much about Pashtun history. He can't speak the language. He thought that the Haqqanis were a tribe. The tribe was Zadran. He doesn't know much. But because he's a popular figure, Pan is Pakistan. He's a popular figure everywhere else. So, and he has projected himself as being Taliban Khan. He was supported in favor of, talked in favor of Taliban. They should be allowed to open offices. He gave a lot of money to the Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, which was the Taliban factory. So he has a very confused sort of thing. You know, wherever he finds, and he's an opportunistic, wherever he finds opportunity for something or the other, he will pretend he's this, he'll pretend that, otherwise he'll pretend he's a Punjabi, he'll try and speak like Maula Jat, you know, give the barkas and things like that. So I won't go by much of Imran Khan being a Pashtun or Pashtun pride being hurt or anything like that. I don't think so.
One more thing, Imran Khan, like he was army's blue-eyed boy when he was picked up, and he has the Pirni behind him. In fact, वो I think Trump के साथ या किसके साथ में भी माला लेके बैठता है कभी-कभी. He has everything going for him. What happened to him? Like this ISI chief, and then getting on the odds with the army and all. What went wrong? And why did he do this?
Last October, the ISI chief had not served as a co-commander. And if he was to be considered as army chief, he had to do 1 year as a co-commander. So that's why Bajwa suggested the ISI chief should be changed and some new person brought. So Bajwa, so that Faiz Hamid, who was the DG ISI, could spend 1 year in a co. Imran Khan didn't want to let this guy go because this guy had helped Imran Khan come into power and managed his parliamentary coalition, managed the acts to be passed in parliament, and he was very useful to Imran Khan. So uspe wo ad gaya, kehta no. And then, you know, so relations deteriorated. Ultimately, after 2 months, he had to sign on the dotted line. But in these 2 months, the army decided that, you know, you can't trust Imran Khan anymore. Because, you know, the critical thing about the army is, army has favorite politicians. They cannot allow the politician to have favorite generals. And because Imran Khan got so closely associated with Faiz Hamid, the army said this man has to go. So his relations deteriorated with the army because of that. And I think he also wanted to hold on to Faiz Hamid for reasons that are not purely professional. There's some people talk about the influence of his wife and things like that. So you don't know. These are all, you know, essay.
I mean, there is some loyalty कि बंदे ने अपना पूरा career खराब कर लिया. आगे का future is in doldrums, all because of friendship with one person.
So, you know, when you start thinking that you forget the people who brought you into power, you start biting the hand that fed you, and you think it was मैं ही हूँ. And then the downfall, you know, we have Vinash Buddhi, Viprit Buddhi Vinash, you know, that thing.
Vinash Kale Viprit Buddhi.
Vinash Kale Viprit Buddhi.